For immigrants traveling across the Atlantic to get to the New World during the 18th and into the 19th century, the voyage should have been one of great joy and hope. But for passengers, especially poor ones, traveling on these ships to this new land of immense opportunity ended up being more about survival. These immigrants had to endure horrid conditions just to get to America. These conditions were so poor that 1 in every 10 passengers died before setting their sights on the New World. Before 1852, when shipping companies started using steamships, this journey would take anywhere from 40 to 90 days, depending on the wind and weather. So what made these voyages so awful? Most immigrants were very poor and couldn't pay a lot for passage, and they were treated as nothing more than cargo by the shipping companies. They were crammed into the lower levels below deck. This section was often called steerage, or third class, the lowest class of sea travel. Depending on the size of the ship, a few hundred to over 1,000 passengers could be squeezed into these small spaces. Wooden beds stacked 2 to 3 high were shared by multiple people at a time. There was a constant shortage of food. Some ships required their passengers to bring their own meager provisions, but if they encountered rough seas during the trip, the voyage would take longer than expected and the food would run out. Sometimes the captains would make extra profits by charging high prices for food needed for survival. Other ships provided food, but only enough to keep the passengers from starving. And the food they provided would quite often be rancid. Sometimes sleazy captains or officers would use these food rations to influence female passengers. After frequent complaints, in 1860, Congress passed a law that enabled captains and officers to be sent to prison for committing sexual offenses against female passengers. It's crazy that it wasn't a law to begin with. There was also a lack of clean water for the passengers to drink. Water was stored in jars that once contained things like vinegar, oil, and turpentine, and weren't properly clean between uses. Here's a quote from Reverend William Bell, who traveled from Europe to Quebec in 1817.
Our water has for some time past been very bad. When it was drawn out of the casks, it was no cleaner than that of a dirty kennel after a shower of rain, so that its appearance alone was sufficient to sicken one. But its dirty appearance was not its worst quality. It had such a rancid smell that to be in the same neighborhood was enough to turn one's stomach.
Another issue was a lack of ventilation. The only ventilation was provided by hatches to the upper decks. These latches would be locked during rough seas and storms. Since the only bathrooms were located above deck, the passengers trapped below during stormy weather would have to go to the bathroom in buckets, which would spill over in the churning waves. The stench was unbearable, and the spread of diseases like cholera, typhus, smallpox, dysentery, and typhoid would spread like wildfire, killing thousands on these ships. To give you a specific example of a voyage, a ship sailing from Ireland in 1847, carrying 276 people fleeing the potato famine, had only 32 bunks and no bathrooms. Food and water was almost non-existent, and the journey took 8 weeks, 2 weeks longer than expected, because the captain took a wrong turn. Unfortunately, 42 people died on the voyage. In 1847 alone, almost 5,000 people died from diseases on ships bound for America. People who were trying to escape the potato famine in Ireland were at an extra risk since they were already malnourished by the famine, with some already carrying diseases, which the voyage's very poor conditions made a lot worse. Other issues that affected all passengers regardless of class were fires and shipwrecks. Just in a 5-year period from 1847 to 1852, there were 43 shipwrecks that resulted in deaths of over 1,000 passengers. It wasn't until 1855 that Congress passed comprehensive regulations for passenger vessels that required the vessels to only have one passenger for every 18 square feet of steerage, that they must provide adequate provisions, and they also required ventilators to help with air quality in the underneath steerage section. A doctor had to be on board each boat, along with sanitation guidelines. Captains were fined $10 for every passenger who died by natural disease during the voyage. These regulations helped, but they were a little bit too late, since by then steamships were greatly reducing the travel time across the Atlantic, and the potato famine was over, so disease was down. It's crazy what these people were willing to go through for the opportunities the New World offered. The poor immigrants that made it across the Atlantic still faced many challenges in an uphill battle once they arrived in America. As always, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Please subscribe for more historical videos. Take care.